rather on behalf of the chair, Sanjay, I would say that in this presentation we shall begin with without any lapse of time, so that we give some kind of time for discussions as well. So let me invite Saminda Hettiachi to speak on Diaspora as a knowledge community in policy making for nation building of post-war Sri Lanka. Please.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm as you can see, I'm from Sri Lanka. I work as a lecturer as well as the university researcher. But in addition to that, I have been involved with diaspora work as a part of my interest. So this presentation is partly on research, but also what I want to do and what I have been doing. So I have been coming to India maybe more than 10 years, but this is my first time to university. It's really impressive, the nice building and all the facilities, very hospitable people. But I was a little bit annoyed when I came here because this facility opened by Rajiv Gandhi, and we are the people who killed Rajiv Gandhi. So that's actually one diaspora connection. So, but today I'm going to talk about the positive part of that is how to get their country knowledge in nation building in Sri Lanka. So the important thing is we actually Sri Lankan maybe mood change from peace building or from rather negative role of diaspora to positive role. So we are in that kind of transition. Am I clear enough? You have a southern accent, right? Okay.
We're ringing your voice.
Okay. So Sri Lanka is a 20 million population, 20 million, and we have actually about 2 million approximately. Switch off?
No. Continue.
Right. It's like 10% of Sri Lankan population is living abroad, so it's a high proportion of the percentage is very high. And most of them actually are temporary workers in the Middle East, mostly housemaids and other unskilled labor force in that region. But also because of war, a lot of people may be forcefully thrown out of the country as a part of the war. They flew the country and they are now mainly refugees or asylum seekers in the Western countries as well as, of course, in India. So my main focus will be part of those people. And the Sri Lankan diaspora are actually very active socially, politically, economically in their own host countries as well as in Sri Lanka. So that's why we talk about this as a major issue in nation building in Sri Lanka. Okay, if you look at the figures, we have traditional, unskilled labor in Saudi Arabia, UAE, and in other Middle Eastern countries. But if you notice, the UK, Canada, France, Germany, Switzerland, they also a high percentage of people living. Now I was looking at in the morning session, I think there are more Sri Lankans in France than Indians. So, this is a very different orientation, but that's the representation. Now, I don't know if you know these guys. This is Michael Ondaj. He's a Sri Lankan diaspora living in Canada. He's the author of English Patient. And now she's a young rapper, right?
British hip hop.
Yeah, and she's very nowadays she's like a celebrity among Sri Lankan diaspora, especially among pro-Tamil, pro-NTT lobby. So she's like the spokesperson among young people. Just to get idea about different profile of diaspora members. Okay, so I will look at in my presentation I talk about their influences and abilities in nation building Sri Lanka, and also how to get their contribution back in developing the country, as well as the base of engaging them in that kind of process. My work is actually limited in mostly northern, Western Europe, and also we look at Canada and North America in terms of online research. So I have been working in these countries, especially continental European countries. And when I say knowledge communities, mainly their online involvement as shared interest and working on different forums for different purposes, but this has also physical element. But we talk about now, that's why the Middle Eastern unskilled employees or the migrants are not part of my work, because we are looking at more about professionals or knowledge where people can contribute knowledge back in the nation building. So they are significant numbers, and also they are very active online, as well as they have different knowledge domains. Okay. So you may be familiar with Sri Lankan situation. So kind of Sri Lankan government able to defeat militarily Tamil Tigers 2 years ago. Actually now, if you look at international context, Sri Lankan government is being criticized for war against, crime against humanity and war crimes. So there's a huge kind of campaign, huge discussion about, especially partly by diaspora, but about accountability. That's one aspect, especially internationally. But if you have been to Sri Lanka recently, you see what's going on there. And internally, there's a big kind of effort on development projects, as well as some effort in reconciliation and power decentralization. So, as a Sri Lankan who is living there, even though I'm from the majority, but I feel like there are a lot of positive changes happening in terms of freedom of movement, people's, the orientation toward economical development. Because 10 years ago we were in a war-torn country and we were always afraid of being hit by a bomb or suicide bomber. So now it's very different orientation. We get a lot of tourists coming in, and Sri Lankan stock market is more successful, those kind of highs in terms of local orientation, especially among, actually not among majority, but also among Tamil people are more, they feel more free in terms of these efforts. Therefore, now our orientation from, let's say, 5 years to now has changed from survival to kind of growth, or more in terms of building the nation. That is why diaspora can play a major role in this process in terms of their expertise and experience. Okay, so these are some of the areas where they can contribute. For example, a lot of these people are living in democratic countries and they are aware about power decentralization models, maybe federalism, governance, and also different institutional arrangements, because they live in these kind of places. As I told you, Canada, USA, UK, other countries in Europe. And also there can be different technology transfer models, plus different financial. I think we discussed a lot of similar example in Irish case, Scottish case, and also the Indian case. So there are different ways of looking at their contribution. I will not go into details. But however, the situation is not very positive, because first of all, the diaspora is very fragmented. There are division along ethnic lines, political ideologies, maybe to some extent religions. So currently, this is not really positive. There are a lot of fragmentation and divisions. And also a lot of them are not part of the policy making, because they are not considered as part of Sri Lankan nation. And also one major issue is some of these diaspora groups are working against the country. The state is their enemy, so you see a lot of activism against Sri Lanka by Sri Lankan diaspora. But there are some collaborators also, but they are considered collaborators with the Sri Lankan government as well as other Sri Lankan organizations, but they are seen as anti-diaspora groups. Plus, in Sri Lanka, actually, the concept of diaspora also is not very known. Even, for example, when I start talking about diaspora, I had to explain what is diaspora. They have not even heard of the term. We know about expatriates, Sri Lankan living abroad, but the term diaspora was even new. But now it's getting kind of awareness. So there are a lot of legal and cultural obstacles to discuss about that. Now when I want to come to this conference, I had a problem ask for travel grant because I can't say I'm going to diaspora. Diaspora is like pro-LGBT, so I'm working in the national language, That's kind of notion in Sri Lanka. So that those things are there. And also, as you know, it's very difficult to collaborate and coordinate with people living across the globe. For a country like Sri Lanka, it's costly affair to even there's a willingness to do in terms of starting these kind of projects. But I think my argument is actually that there is a possibility and there are opportunities where we can engage them positively. For example, there are examples or projects of situations where diaspora communities engage in Sri Lankan nation in development, but as private ventures. Now, the best example I can quote is actually post-tsunami reconstruction. After tsunami, we saw a situation where all these divisions and all these conflicts were kind of at least temporary. There are people, even pro-LDT, pro-government, all the diaspora among other international help. So that's a very key point I want to emphasize here, because we have seen situations where you can collaborate and then do work based on that. Therefore, there is a need and there's a space now for us to develop some kind of strategic, as I said, strategic, long-term oriented policy making with a multi-stakeholder approach. And now I'm not a diaspora researcher. I'm doing research on ICT and web technology. So I believe with my expertise and experience, this is actually a very logical space, the web and web technologies, where scattered communities and individuals can collaborate and share knowledge and then do that to the contribution. Maybe how long do I have? 5 minutes to do it, 5, 6. Okay, so I have been working, there are different projects, but I want to show you one example of a project where I have been part of. That is actually Sri Lankan Diaspora Professional Association. What we have been trying to do is to gather people from different countries and get their expertise and try to have discussions and forums and then bring back their knowledge and expertise in terms of projects, maybe policy suggestions and discussion to Sri Lankan government and in terms of research and other policy tools. So I have been doing, at least trying to do from at least 2003-4. This is a small example. We started with 2, 3, actually 5 people, but grew up to more than 100 in 20 countries. But now in the height of war in 2007, because of the government's, the cutting down of activities and all this, we had to scale down our operation. Now we are trying to reorient, because those days the focus was mainly peace building and reconciliation. But now we are talking about more about development. Okay, these are some of events we kind of participated. First one is in Germany, Munich, and this Diaspora conference in Hanover. And these are also in, this is one in Stuttgart and other presentation in Italy. And we had a lot of opportunities to meet researchers and policymakers in other countries. This is in New Zealand. And we had some, public lecturers and meetings organized by Diaspora. We were invited to talk and had discussion forums. And also there are a lot of Sri Lankan, especially Tamil politicians live out of Sri Lanka because of the fear of LGBT, threat of LGBT, and therefore I had a chance to meet them and talk with them. And also Sri Lankan diaspora in countries like UK, Canada, they have their own functions, like this is a New Year festival, and this is a conference in London, and this is a kind of pro-LGBT protest campaign in Eiffel Tower, and there's a conference here. And also there are a lot of activities among diaspora communities where my other colleagues take part. And also we try to also kind of make our case in like official forums in European Union and federalist conferences. So the point is that we have been trying to do some work, maybe not really in a large scale, but the experience is actually there's a very high positive response. The only thing is, you can't make it in the mainstream because there are other issues. Okay. Now my recommendation, now there's a huge role the government can play, like for example, like what the Indian government has done, maybe in a different scale, but the government has a big role at least to get out of this fear mentality and make it as a positive force. And as I told you, awareness among Sri Lankan public should be also increased. Diaspora should be recognized as a part of overall nation of Sri Lanka. Now they are like tourists or foreigners, because that should change. And there should be like institution, and I was really interested with the secretary's argument about all these tools they have. So we should also learn from maybe from them, and also best practices in other countries. That's a very important point. I also think that universities and higher education institutions can be play the pioneering role in terms of this knowledge exchange. And as Professor Mark mentioned in the morning, this public-private partnership model. And my emphasis here again is about social media, especially all this social media and Web 2.0 technology. So these are real knowledge forums where especially young diaspora members can be addressed and engaged. Okay, so this is, I will not go into details. The point is that there are opportunities where Sri Lanka as a country who is coming out of it and engage diaspora in a positive way, and with win-win situation for both diaspora as well as for the country. So the new web media is a very effective way of engaging and working with them. So therefore, my thinking, I'm trying to do along with that. This is one part of research, but at the same time to practice. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, I have to take flight back at 6 p.m. So this is my contact details. You can be in touch. Do I get a chance to answer one of the questions? Thank you very much.
For sheer want of time, probably you can make very quick remarks or one or two questions. You can have two persons respond to this.
Quick question. I think you have a very important observation that the diaspora has to be recognized as a positive force. So, now, what is the percentage of the Sinhalese and the Tamils of the two media?
Okay.
Does it that makes a difference? Does it make a difference in that?
Yeah. Now, for example, if you look at the very kind of rough idea. Now, Middle East, mainly Sri Lanka, Sinhalese, actually maybe 80% Sinhalese, but in continental European countries like Germany, France, Switzerland, they are maybe 90%. Exactly. So overall, maybe I would say 60% Sinhalese all over the world. But now, for this purpose, post-migrant or diaspora active in Western countries are mainly 80% are other than UK, Canada, or even Canada is Tamil. So yes, this is the breakthrough we have made, because they are saying that now when in nominal terms diaspora means a threat. That's the understanding. Yeah.
That's unless you change that mindset, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And where your essay will be located?
Now you mean in terms of work?
Physically,
now we are based in Sri Lanka, so we do a lot of work outside Sri Lanka. But in Sri Lanka, we don't still promote that, because we want to organize and then wait till things become better and then it's understood.
Yeah. Obviously, thank you. You have a question? Yes, because today is a very difficult day. You also have to travel. That's why we are sitting with 16.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you said that the Sri Lankan diaspora is very social active, but at the same time, the initiatives towards the home country are more personal initiatives, really based in individual impetus. So I would like to ask you, you that are working on the ground with these groups, at the operational level, what could be, what are the opportunities, like bottom-up opportunities, to create some associative or communitary opportunities to gather these diasporas to have a greater impact towards the home country?
Okay, now I think in Southeast, maybe compared to India, Sri Lanka is very open for non-government organizations. We have all type of non-government organizations, from human rights, international allies, all the kind of organization you can have there. For example, now one way of entry will be working with non-government organizations. You can have a community-based organization form for working with them. So one way of landing. Now this happened after tsunami, because we invited all type of non-government, you can work. And also now one thing really, the media orientation. Media orientation is still, it's not reflecting reality as many other cases. So people can come, they can start business, because now I'm not very sure about other countries, but Sri Lanka is very liberal in terms of, for example, visiting, investing, all types of ventures. So because it's a small country, depend on tourism. So therefore, entry into, now even all of you can come to Sri Lanka without visa. You get visa on arrival. So so therefore, of course there are kind of threats from government. If you are seen as pro-LTT, then they will trouble you. But you can start some, I don't know, maybe non-government organization, any other community-based organization, work for reconciliation, reconstruction, building, investing. There are diaspora bonds. So ILO is doing a lot of work in Sri Lanka.
Small observation. Oh yeah, please. Actually, you have talked about integrating diaspora with Sri Lankan development, okay, and realizing their role for the development of Sri Lanka. But what should be the modalities to engage them? See, for the process of nation building, we have to go through the planning and policy making, and you are telling that they should be included in the policy making as well as decision making process. What are the modalities to accommodate various ideas and to make it the reality?
Yeah, no, that's one problem we have, because in terms of institutions, we don't have serious institutions to accommodate. But at the same time, Sri Lanka has dual nationality policy. So you can work, if you are like a diaspora, you can easily get Sri Lankan nationality, right? And then work on that. I mean, of course, then there should be like a new mechanisms, like the secretary mentioned in the morning, all these diaspora information centers, but also board of investment. There are different forums, but not allocated particularly for diaspora. There's a challenge on government changing that mindset and forming them. That is why I'm interested in looking at Indian example. Yeah. So I'm very sorry I have to go now. Thank you very much. All the best for the other presenters.
We are actually running behind schedule. So follow up on Dr. Varno for the second presentation. It's on brain circulation and Indian development, a perspective from Australia and New Zealand.
Oh, very soon, right? Oh, I will get psyched up for it.
Okay, thank you. It's been off-putting. This color is very different from what I put it. I had a kind of peach, and now it's kind of a murky khaki. But just a couple of quotes. It's sort of considering the idea of diaspora from, if you like, the destination versus the homeland source perspective. In the first one, the hard to read there, the Prime Minister of India way back in 2002. Talking about what's happened since then, a much greater move towards capping the diaspora for India's benefit. New Zealand's Governor General recently, he was Governor General recently, an Indo-Fijian by origin, talking about the work of India diaspora as not only benefits New Zealand in the sense of having brought skills to New Zealand, but it has a much broader kind of function in New Zealand's relationship with India. It's still kind of a kind of New Zealand, a destination country kind of take on things about the enhanced trade, tourism, scientific and educational needs. I'll skip over some of this. I've been asked to be reasonably brief here because we're running so late. As we've seen in this conference, as we see in the program of this conference, a lot of the focus on diaspora has moved from the kind of very economically IT-focused, science sector-focused to a broader kind of take on aspects of diaspora. In Australia and New Zealand, there's been relatively little study on diaspora development relationships. There's been a certain amount on transnationalism, including several publications of my own in New Zealand. And so in a sense, this is a very kind of exploratory thing. It's not based on empirical work that I've done, other than what's spun off from work I've done looking at Indian settlement and identity in New Zealand. In the original title, I didn't have the word diaspora. I inserted the word diaspora because I was mostly going to talk to brain circulation. One of my problems with that is finding enough information without doing a series of primary research projects. And so I'll briefly at the end talk about more broader aspects of diaspora in terms of the relationship to India with New Zealand and Australia. In terms of the histories, just very briefly summarizing a couple of things. Quite similar between Australia and New Zealand in terms of Indian settlement. It started in the 19th century, first half of the 20th century, very racist policies in place, not just against Indians, but against Asians in general. They were the main kind of non-Euro populations there. In the Indian situation was somewhat different. Then China, the Chinese, because India was part of the British Empire, but still there was some very exclusionary kind of policies. And so Australia's White Australia policy, as it was called, ended in about 1966. New Zealand's was never called a white New Zealand policy, but it effectively had a similar kind of feeling to it. Ended really completely in 1987 with a new immigration policy which focused on so-called level playing field in terms of skills, education. It wasn't liberal from some perspective, but certainly from the point of view of race or country of origin it was. And since then, both countries, in the last 20 years, both countries, Australia and New Zealand, had quite radical increases in Asian population, mainly Chinese and Indian. You can see in terms of Australia's immigration, these are permanent residency permits, a rapid increase just since in the last 10 years or so in terms of the Indian influx. That top dotted line actually includes onshore applications. For some reason, Australians make it different than the settlers who come and apply overseas income and total. So the top line is really the dash line is really the total amount. So in recent years, somewhere between 20 and 25,000 permanent residency successful applications in Australia. In New Zealand, India also being on the top there. Documented some of the other South Asian origins. The only one of significant, setting aside Fiji, is Sri Lanka. It's still relatively minor. And I don't have time to explain the kind of fluctuations, but very much related to changes in New Zealand immigration policy, but also kind of a chain migration impact in India when New Zealand became more prominent and more attractive to Indian migrants. A change in policy in 2003, reducing the level down to about 4,000 permanent residents a year. But you can see the kind of yellow to the orangey brown line there. That's Fiji, which is about 90% of those migrants are Indo-Fijian. In recent years, in the last couple of years, more or less the same level as migration from India. So in that sense, in terms of Indian diaspora, it's quite different groups in New Zealand because the Fijian diaspora, the Indo-Fijian diaspora, is obviously an extra 5 generations away from India, 4 or 5. A great deal of diversity in terms of birthplaces in New Zealand of people of Indian ethnicity. India is now the largest source, but Fiji and then New Zealand born are also quite significant. In terms of brain circulation, an important element is of course the movement of students, even though sometimes the term is mostly applied to skilled migrants, so in other words, those who already have the skills. In a sense, students are those who potentially have the skills and usually are in privileged positions to being able to be able to afford or to be able to be sponsored to be an international student in Australia or New Zealand. And students from India are the largest growing group in both Australia and New Zealand. The green triangle line there showing that for 1 year anyways, they surpassed Chinese students, which in Australia and New Zealand have been the biggest by far, in the case of New Zealand, source of international students. The downturn after 2009, obviously, as a result of the several incidents in Australia, racist abuse and attacks and so on, were well publicized both in Australia and in India. I think explains part of the downturn. It's a little bit harder to see that as a major thing in New Zealand, except that the top is China, the blue Chinese students from people from China. It's the red being Korea, but in the last couple of years, Indian students have surpassed Korean students to become the second largest source countries. That's international, so it's not just Asian focused, it includes other sources. So one of the issues in terms of brain circulation, brain drain, is that in earlier periods of student migration from India into Australia and New Zealand, under the Colombo plan, there was very much an expectation that those students would go back to their home countries in Asia, those Commonwealth project. Whereas recent migrations are very different because they tend to be, some of them are sponsored by international agencies, multilateral, bilateral sponsorship in some cases, some cases Australian New Zealand aid sponsored, but many of them are private students, and the objectives are quite different in many cases. In a more immediate sense, many of the Indian students that have been surveyed of this, one of the main objectives of a student visa is to work towards a permanent residency, and both Australian and New Zealand governments have recognized that and actually have policies in place to actually encourage that. So it's not as if they consider that a way of sneaking in the back door. They're actually saying, this is a way of capturing these brains, if you like. For example, graduate job search visas in both countries have come in only in the last 5 years or so. And this is an interesting little graph in terms of all of the successful graduate job search visa approvals in these 3 years from 2007 to 2010. At the beginning of that period, 2/3 were from China, and that's diminished. There's various reasons for that, but But in terms of India, there's 15%, nearly 50% of all those successful applications. So they become a major kind of form of transition for Indian students. I guess the question then is in terms of how this relates to the diaspora and in whose benefit is this, are these migrations. The outcome of those transitional visas are shown there in recent years. 72% of all Indian students, and this is about a 5-year period, that's shown on the previous, well, a bit longer period than that, shown on the previous graph, 72% made a transition to jobs, and 47%, which is a pretty high percentage really, nearly half of all of those who came in as international students were successful in getting permanent residency. Compared to Chinese students, for example, 43% into jobs, 23% into permanent residency. But there's not any available research in the case of New Zealand or Australia that I've been able to find anyways, that actually has done useful surveys as to what happened to the 53% as to how many went back to India, as to whether it was much greater than backwards. I'm just moving on. So just in the last 5 minutes, you can. 5 to 7. Just looking at some of the other kind of broader kinds of relationships with diaspora and development. One is obviously remittances. This data has been quoted a couple of times, if not 3, slightly varying to which period, but this is the 2010 World Bank data, is $55 billion US dollars. And India has the highest level of remittances. Well, Australia and New Zealand are fairly low down the pecking order on that, I suppose. Australia being the 9th and New Zealand being the 18th, but obviously still in terms of relativities, those are significant contributions. The thing that I would like to do more of, there's some mostly anecdotal evidence in 1 or 2 small studies and in media accounts and so on, relates to kind of the broader kind of idea of knowledge exchange, and there is some evidence of kind of recirculation of IT workers from Australia, for example, back to India, relatively small scale compared to the large American and European kind of recirculations or returns. But there's also some talk about some joint ventures that have started between Australian companies and Indian companies have been spin off of the diaspora in areas like agricultural development, food processing, minerals extraction, and so on, things that Australia and New Zealand have been seeing have some kind of competitive advantage in. Another kind of element of kind of broader. But at the moment, free trade agreements are being, bilateral free trade agreements are being negotiated between both Australia and New Zealand. And as a quote there from one of the Indian newspapers in Australia says, it seems as if India has become flavored with the seas, and then finally, India has become flavored with the seas, and Australia is seen as the opportunity. As well as promise from New Zealand, saying a similar kind of thing. What this presentation intended to do was present a lot more specific information, a lot more specific case studies on the role of entrepreneurs, because there are a considerable number of entrepreneurial connections that I've kind of already alluded to. But interestingly, when we look at the population of Indians and Australians, they tend to be more working in kind of professional jobs, although there's a certain amount of underemployment as well, as opposed to the expectation you would expect more to be self-employed. So it's not that in most countries the Indian is seen as a prototypical entrepreneur in every case. Just another example of increasing kind of linkages. Bank of Baroda has established full services in India, which they've had for the last 60 years, I think, in Fiji. And then just one or two other kind of possible impacts of diaspora that we mentioned earlier already, is the impact relationships to tourism. Amazingly, parallel growth of tourism in terms of this green line from Australia to India, and the red line, India to Australia, and more modest, but also very much running parallel. And it's the case of New Zealand, and it's very kind of known, I guess, that this kind of part of this continuum, like once you have more permanent residency or more international students and so on, tourism is stimulated by that, both in the sense of people visiting relatives, people going to check out a country, restaurant, but also just in terms of higher visibility in both countries together. And diaspora tourism is also seen as a kind of opportunity to do that. We see at the last Pravasi tea at Divas earlier this year, the Planning Commission Deputy Chairman was quoted as saying overseas Indians should not invest in India if they feel their money could be better invested elsewhere, but take interest in India, interest in same things are happening here rather than investing in India. Non-resident Indians should give it all the package to Chile to visit India, so tourism is kind of part of that package of raising profile among the diaspora at this point. And then finally, many well-known examples of cultural diffusion, the kind of diasporic novels, movies, plays. Not that many, maybe one significant novel in the case of Australia, another one in the case of New Zealand, a few others, but also very sort of strong cultural manifestations of the Indian communities in Australia and New Zealand. Quite major Diwali festivals in Sydney, Melbourne, Auckland, for example. In Auckland, the Diwali festival every year attracts over 100,000 people to it, and partly it's a diasporic community, but also it's a broader community. And there's other kind of high-profile thing that's high-profile in New Zealand, I think it's pretty good profile in India, I don't know. Is that in those years, that's only years like data for 2007, about 120 Bollywood films have been shot on location in New Zealand. That from Switzerland last night, and they said that there's a lot being shot in Switzerland, something about the mountains that Bollywood likes. But our Prime Minister has just been to India and signed an agreement on audiovisual co-production, so I presume you can expect that to increase. Fairly kind of simple conclusions. Globalization has accelerated the ability of people, investment, knowledge, and so on. But sovereign borders do remain, so local government remains important in regulating and facilitating these movements. I guess the immigration policies relatively recently, Australia and New Zealand have been evolving and increasingly recognizing that it's not all about permanent residency and settlement forever. There's a recognition that there's going to be on movement of people that we can capture these brains, these skills for a period of time, but they're likely to move on either back to their home country or to third countries. So far, there's no the evidence I've been presenting seems to be more evidence of the brain drain and brain circulation, but we need to do more research on that. And then just finally, the kind of importance of conferences like this in terms of finding out more than we have so far. I've done several, 2 or 3, almost 3 papers or 4 papers on transnationalism in Indian communities in New Zealand. It has tended to be looking at it from the point of view of the settlement outcomes for those communities as well as the cost benefits for the host communities more than diasporic feedback to the homeland. Keep to my time.
It's very but that was very long time back. Very, very long time back. I'm Indian British, and I'm the diaspora as well. So for the short period of time that IGNOU has acted, I'm taking over from IGNOU. But oh, sorry, I thought you were IGNOU. Sorry, my name is Sanjoy Nayak. I'm Sanjoy Nayak. Yes, what we are going to do is basically after each presentation we'll take just 2 questions, and I'm going to exploit my position here and ask the first question, which I think he has already answered to some extent. Is there any solid proof of brain circulation that you have admitted yourself that it is more of a brain drain situation between Indian professionals going and working in New Zealand as well as in Australia? But do you know of any work that is not done in New Zealand but done in Australia which solidly proves that there is brain circulation in the
Well, there are some livings in Australia surveying people leaving as permanent or long-term periods of time as they classify PLP migrants going out, and of the Indian, both students and permanent residents, there is a proportion, but probably less than half of those who left who've stated they're going to leave for long-term. Something less than half, 48% or something like that, have actually stayed with India as the next destination. But there's not any in-depth studies that I'm aware of, by statistics, Australia, New Zealand, or by academics that have done this in depth. So it is kind of an opportunity for some kind of collaborative work with people in India. There's much more kind of known about what's happening post-America, I suppose.
Thank you. It's a very good presentation. Can we take 2 questions? Mark.
Thank you.
From our
Thank you. I really enjoyed the presentation. What I particularly like about it is it raises the question of the Australian states in India's diaspora strategy, if you like. I know Australia itself has its own set of diaspora policies, particularly Advance Australia, which is the major network. Has Australia thought about how it relates to the Indian diaspora in Australia vis-à-vis its own interests? And do the Australian interests align with the interests of the Indian diaspora and India itself?
I mean, my sense is that they don't think very much about it. When you're saying it's the states, I mean, there is actually quite strong kind of linkages between, like, the state of New South Wales and the Indian diaspora. The Indian associations in that state have quite strong political linkage, and so, but it's more about the settlement outcomes than the diaspora return. And I think both in Australia and New Zealand, because New Zealand has a strong diaspora too, it has 20% of its population overseas, and it's trying to attract them back or link into them. It's more both countries are more interested in that, probably, in my view, than the development implications. Although in both countries they have increasingly said they're going to try to harmonize immigration policy with development policy. And in the case of New Zealand and then very recently in Australia, they have done that in the Pacific with temporary seasonal worker migration. They've said, it has to have development outcomes in the source countries to go ahead. So I don't know. It's not broader than that.
I mean, it resonates strongly with the case of the Chinese community in Canada, who moved to Canada, particularly from Hong Kong, naturalised, and then a small percent, but a percent then moved back to China. And Canada has, based on, I think, dubious concepts of flexible citizenship, which kind of besmirches and smears the concept of citizenship somewhat, has kind of toughened up citizenship laws accordingly. But now it's beginning to realise, actually, this could be a phenomenally important resource to improve Canadian ties into Canada, Canadian ties into the Chinese market. and also to promote Canadian foreign policy interests in China also. So
Yeah,
some parallels with
that has been the case to some extent in New Zealand and Australia, but it's sort of been promoted by quasi-government agencies that are supported by government, but it's independent of government support, promoting the idea of flexibility in multiple citizenship and transnational benefits to both countries. But usually they're thinking of their own country first, but like Australia or New Zealand first, as probably Canada is too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you want to present next, or Anjali is going to present? Oh, sorry. You are very popular.
You still have one more question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll stand first.
No, I just want to check with you. See, when there was a problem in Australia, actually, with students, either the press or the government project, there was a divergence of perception among the Indians, early settlers. Is it true, or is it creation of media?
Well, I live in New Zealand, so I wasn't there at the time, so I didn't see what happened. But I think there was a relatively small number of incidents that were quite widely reported. That doesn't make them acceptable, but in terms of the number of students, it was relatively small. I think the government did. Government did try very hard to try to come up with some kind of policing issue, regulation, some kind of media campaign to moderate that. But I don't deny that those incidents obviously did happen. Was that answer your question? I didn't witness anything. There were serious issues in their own rights at the time.
Thank you. Next is Anjali. She's going to talk about reverse brain drain, millennium strategies for developed and developing countries. Anjali. Henceforth, all presenters will have 10 minutes presentation. After 10 minutes, we will say stop. Otherwise, I will make a lot of noise, so that you cannot present anymore. And 2 minutes for question and answer. So that will be 12 minutes in total, and still we will probably go on up to 5 o'clock. Probably.
Great, thank you so much for inviting me here, and I apologize, I did not make a PowerPoint, and I also have a sore throat, so if you can't understand me, please let me know that I will speak up. But the heat and the AC did not make somewhere it went bad. I started writing this paper, and I think when I started writing it, it became more of a book project. And I'd be very happy to hear your comments on what you think in terms of the topic itself. Should I shorten it or not, and then we can talk more about it. But my paper is on reverse brain drain strategies by both developed and developing countries. And the reason I came up with this was, to sum it up, very well put quotation by Charles Handy. He said, quote, Karl Marx would be amused. He longed for the day when the workers would own the means of production. Now they do. And this has become really true with our panel topic as well, which is human capital, and something which I touch on in my paper. So first of all, what do we mean by human capital? When I looked at human capital, I looked at various definitions, and I found that human capital is best defined by economists as those important investments that an individual can make in education and experience, which can also be taken as training. So I looked at basically migrants who go from developing countries to developed countries, and it's considered a brain drain. And then it's always one-way direction. It's a brain drain for the less developing countries. However, when they come to the developed countries, such as the United States, which is the focus in my paper, they get further education and training in the United States. But when they choose to return or come back to their home countries, it is a reverse brain drain or United States' own brain drain that they can be mown off. So it's interesting how everybody is trying to retain the best and the brightest, be it the developed countries or the developing countries. They want to retain or attract back their overseas nationals. And that's essentially the research paper that I have written. And I will cite some specific examples of strategies by both developed countries and developing countries in order to harness that. And since morning we've heard about a lot of these strategies. I'll touch a little bit more on the American side of it, because the Indian government's strategies for attracting the overseas diaspora, we've heard quite a bit by Mr. Didar Singh in the morning, and I have something similar. So I want to first start with just a quick look at why this paper is important. I think it's an important piece in the field of international migration and international relations, because it takes us further into this jargon of brain drain and brain gain. I actually brought my book, which I published in 2009. If anyone wants to take a look, it has just been released for the South Asian market. It's on Indian diaspora in the United States. Brain drain or gain, that was what I wrote about, and I went further in this research. And I think this will just, the topic goes forward when we look at this whole thing in the 21st century. So I want to first start with the United States immigration. And one thing, if anyone knows about the United States, immigration is a very controversial topic in the United States. It's always a topic for debate. However, the debate stays mostly with the illegal immigration into the United States, whereas we are focusing on the legal migration or the influx of professionals who come into the United States and take up jobs. And there's a huge resentment with the local population with this influx of migrants that come in and take the jobs, whereby implying that the local workforce is unable to fill these jobs. And especially during the global recession in the last 2-3 years, this huge backlash was further taken up. I'm sorry, I wanted to mention real quick, with the developed countries, I focused on the United States because I lived there and worked there. It was easy for me to look at policies in the United States. And for the developing countries, it becomes very broad. So I focused my research into Asian countries, obviously looking at India, China, Singapore, Malaysia, just a couple of countries, just really looking at some of the strategies that they have implemented. Why Asia? Because Asia is, the reason for focusing on Asia is because in the United States, Asians have been huge with immigration into the United States since 1965 with the Immigration and Naturalization Act. And they have become the leading source continent, including Mexico after that. So Asia, also the Asian century is called 21st century is going to be the Asian century, so it made sense to focus on this. So immigration reform in the United States, and I want to look at why they would think that losing human capital or immigrant entrepreneurs would be a brain drain for them. Here's an interesting, if you've been to New York, I don't know how many of you have been or seen the Statue of Liberty, it says under that, give us you're tired, you're poor, you're homeless. And I think it's in the 21st century or since 1965, we can change it to give us your scientists, your mathematicians, your engineers and doctors, and this is literally what it has become. Selective immigration laws and policies to attract the best and the brightest from around the world, especially developing countries, which has a huge talent pool of engineers and doctors. So just a couple of immigration reforms. The landmarks were the 1965, followed by the 1990 law, which specifically raised the number of H-1B visas, which is a work permit to be in the United States, which is what I have, to accommodate this new global wave that kind of began in the 1990s to fill all the IT jobs. So this was the starting point. And they further created employment-based preference, 5 categories: priority workers, professionals with advanced degrees, and so on and so forth. So there was, just to make a quick case of, yes, there was a clear case of brain drain, or they wanted to bring in. But let me go straight to the Asian immigration. I think I'll just read out from the graph that I had. Just a quick look at how many are in the United States in employment. Asia is 58%, with highest China, followed by India. And in the student visa category, it's 50% Asia, with China, South Korea, and India in that order. Again, I looked at both education and training or employment. The strategy that I looked at specifically was the Startup Visa Act of 2011, which was by Senator Kerry, who said that if an immigrant entrepreneur can get investment for that particular venture, then they would give them a green card. And there's a whole details about the startup visa, but this was a strategy to stop a lot of people from returning from the United States to their home countries. So this was a very interesting strategy. And I have touched upon a lot of research by leading works by people who have made the case that immigrants, entrepreneurs have made a positive contribution to the U.S. economy through patents, innovation, startups, etc. Quickly going on to the developing countries like India, China, in Malaysia in particular. Malaysia, I'll come to it in the end because that was the most brilliant strategy. China and India, of course, we have heard, so I will not go into it. China was interesting. As we know, a lot of people will never return to China. Chinese diaspora do not want to go back to China. So the Chinese government began what was known as I want to give you the exact word. The Chinese government began what is known as the Beijing Learned 1,000 Talents Program, offering top scientists grants of 1 million yuan, about $146,000 in salaries, as well as generous lab funding, just to attract them back to China. So this was one strategy that China implemented, and a lot of them were lured back because of family ties, and if anyone knows more, we can talk more about it. But a lot of people did not want to go back. And again, the personal ties and economic benefit was very high, political freedom not being there, very low as the reasons for going or not going. India, I will skip. We know quite a bit about the PVD and all of the things that the Indian government has done. Going to the strategy by Malaysia, it was very interesting, termed as Edu Cities. These are educational institutions that are mirrored exactly like Western institutions, and the idea is to stop both their students from leaving Singapore, and but also there's a lot of Malaysian students there, as well as attracting overseas students to Singapore so that they come there and study. And this was very interesting because many developed countries like US, UK, Australia, New Zealand have actually tied up with the Singapore government to lend them their name, because they now see a better prospect for education in these places. So there's, for example, you have Britain's Nottingham University, Australia's Monash University, MIT, so on and so forth. There's a lot of interesting. Malaysia also cleverly markets itself to the Middle East because it wants to attract a lot of Middle East students, where Malaysia is a relatively relaxed Muslim country. So you have all of these different strategies. The idea is to attract as many talented people to the country in the field of education. That more or less is my paper. I wanted to look at different strategies and essentially the notion of human capital. Workers are ruling the day. It appears to be that they are free to move, and if tomorrow a developing country looks more attractive, that's where everyone's headed. And again, it's circular. Again, if it's not working out and if a developed country looks attractive, they'll again move. And this is the 21st century human capital or international migrants. I take questions. Thank you. Yeah, EduCities in Malaysia.
Yeah,
In Singapore.
Malaysia, another education in Malaysia, or Monash University, and all the other Malaysian video.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. The concept of sorry for cutting you off. The very concept of human capital is very interesting because that's what you have brought in. But the methodology of measuring human capital should be different from who wants to retain the professionals. Because human capital means capital is invested in creating that human being in terms of professional human being. So if that is so, that capital has been invested in India and that capital is working in America, so the methodology for measuring these two should be different. That's what my interest is. My interest for a long time has been, I'm actually an advisor, I'm not a very strict academic, advisor to various international organizations. Our main problem is to measure what is the brain drain, brain circulation and brain gain. How we can measure it. But the methodology hasn't been so far very strictly found. So in that context, I think the methodology should be different because both developed and developing countries both want to retain the professionals. But it is the developing countries which are losing the human capital while the developed countries are gaining the human capital in that sense. But if there is a reverse brain drain or brain circulation, then only the developing countries will benefit, and that is a very known fact. But it can be put in very different terms in terms of state failure, market failure, labor market failure, and things of that sort. So, okay, I won't take too much of time, but methodology is very important in this context. We have a lot of people raising their hands, so I'll give it to my friend from Nigeria.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it's quite interesting, and I must appreciate your effort in the research. By and large, the issue of human capital, like you said, is quite hard to measure because the returns actually dwarf the debt. There's private returns to the individual, whether is being sponsored by the government on its own in terms of returns from human capital. There's also the social returns, which is far difficult to measure. Because they participate better in the electionary process, better in policy making. Like you are saying that if, for example, I'm trained in Nigeria and I go to America after my PhD, of course, even though I stayed 10 years in America, my investment was based in Nigeria. So I don't see that I didn't bring people in America, because I'm going back home. Then I think the issue of return migration, like the previous speaker just spoke, has to do with the issue of policies. For example, where I get best return on my capital is where I go to. Of course, there are issues of immigration policies. But the home government, like is being seen in India, has a lot of role to play in terms of trying to retain the best human capital they have developed. So the government has also a role to play. And so I don't see it like a reverse building, it's more of a brain circulation, like going back home. You mentioned because of China, that they find it difficult to return. And I can trace that to issue of their population policy. Just one child and your wife. There's no much historical and cultural affiliation. Unlike where I have about the larger family. So no matter what I'm retaining, there's still some cultural affiliation that I have to go back. So these issues have to be in some context. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Yeah. Good points. You're taking the point forward.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll take a couple of questions, then we finally answer. Yeah. the friend from
I
Canada.
think my question sounds somewhat similar to that, because I was interested in your comment, like if tomorrow a better opportunity opens somewhere else, they'll go, and I'm kind of thinking about the stickiness of place. So what's happening here? Why isn't place sticking? Why aren't people sticking to place? And I wonder if you need some kind of life cycle vision. I think it's, the age, what is it? Category of age, wage, vintage in terms of workers go. So if people aren't sticking to a place, if place doesn't have that traction, what is it about the person you're imagining who's doing all of this moving that makes this a very specific sector of community that we're looking at? Is it about a certain age, a generation, a life cycle?
I think you raised a very important, I'm sorry.
Well, that's an interesting finding study that the comparison between the developed countries and the developing countries. But I wanted to see what the difference that you said that both are trying to vying to attract talent, both the developing countries and the developed countries. But I'm sure that there have been differences in the strategies. What the strategies of the developed countries and the strategies of developed countries. What's the difference that you find in them, and that is where perhaps we can draw lessons from the developing countries. But again, what I disagree with while comparing with that of the developing countries case with that of the developed countries is that they're not losing their talent in the sense that we are looking at in the trends that we are seeing in the developing countries. So at the same time, they are also getting every time the fresh flows. The talent, the skills. So the problem is completely different that of the developing countries' perspective. And the other, which I wanted to hear from you, is the Indian case. What are the India's efforts to get the talent back? Because PBD is not an initiative to get the talent back. It's just to keep them engaged, a cultural kind of thing. I don't see India has introduced any such kind of serious policies in order to attract either scientists, engineers or talents with a successful... I want you to just throw some light on Indian case.
Okay, I think there is a hand raised there. Did you, our friend from Southeast Asia? No? Yeah? No, he.
Okay, yeah, I think you mentioned the Chinese program for one solar panel. I know that very well because I'm involved in it. This program is promulgated in 2008. In my knowledge, it's not only for overseas Chinese. Actually, it's for foreigners. According to Chinese plan, they would like attract 1,000 top talent in the world in 5 years. So there are a lot of assistance ongoing to support this plan. So of course, overseas Chinese is one of the target, but not the only one. Like all of you here, if you are qualified, maybe Chinese can support you.
This is with regard to the epistemological aspect of the term used, circulation of brain and human capital. Can we use it as the kind of synonymous? Because personally I understand human capital includes professional education and the skills, and circulation of brain means it has that cognitive aspect of that, much of the professional thing. So that synonymity will be little problematic. And second thing, see, we have been hearing about the circulation of brain. Then what about the people who have migrated as unskilled labor force, whose brain has not been in fact put into whatever the practice? So how do you look that aspect? How do you define that brain drain or brain circulation and human capital?
Okay, a few questions, but interesting ones. Let me quickly go over the first one. I think you raised a very important question. I had that, I was going to talk, but there wasn't enough time. Why are people not sticking has a lot to do with various things, in particular stricter immigration laws in the United States since 9/11. In particular, students are affected. There's a lot of vigilance. Every time they move, they have to inform the Homeland Security, so it's not as attractive. Immigration process is tough. A lot of people are getting annoyed with it. That's one reason. From the gender point of view, a lot of these visas do not include mobility for the spouse to work. They're on a dependent visa. I mentioned Asian. Why Asia? Because of a rising Asia, the idea of going back home. India as a country, very much thrives on community and family and the personal ties. And one thing that you mentioned, generational differences. People are a lot more open to moving than they were 10, 20 years ago. So all of these combine together to make an immigrant. We don't know if we're going to stay here. We may move if it's better. If we can get a mix of mom and home and job and money, I'd take that. Something like that. With respect to the differences with your question, sorry, somebody had a question about, I didn't write it down, but anyways, coming to the, you wanted to me to touch upon the Indian side, what is going on. I think one of the biggest things that they have done is the OCI card, which has made it really easier for people to start the investments in India, which was not there earlier. So the government is not really saying come back and take up a particular job, but if somebody wants to come home, with respect to transfer of money or transfer of property, those things are very much facilitated by the banks and the government here. So there is no such hurdle that you can really talk about in terms of Indian government stopping it. But just the fact that there is, by PBD, I was really talking about the recognition of the diaspora to open up the idea that there is a platform where you can come and discuss the possibility of coming to India and the ventures that you can get into. As you know, a lot of companies in India are now headed by the top, not as lower, but middle and top level management by people who have come back from outside countries because they have received the training to take up that job to facilitate further the dialogue between the lower level management and the senior levels. So this is the expertise that they bring back, and that I think is to those companies' advantages. This has happened both in China and India. Yeah, I was really referring to a lot of articles that came out recently about the 1,000 program. Now that it's not really targeting diaspora, at the same time, by foreign overseas, is attractive to a lot of Chinese overseas as well. And a lot of Chinese professors have actually gone back because they now get the leeway to start their labs from scratch and do some to do a lot of research. So it's an incentive, ideally it's an incentive to those Chinese diaspora people who may want to go back home and be part of, in some province, I think it was mentioned that where it is really, really economically booming, in Sichuan or in southeastern part, and they're very much interested in going back and seeing if they want to stay there. And lastly, I think someone checked human capital. Yes, for the unskilled worker, again, I mentioned human capital has two sides, education and training. So it may not have anything to do with a degree, but if an unskilled worker is worked for 5 years and has trained on the job, that's huge. It's an essential part of human capital. I would look at it as human capital. So I think that's it.
Thank you very much. Who is present? Are you still clapping for her?